All righty, everyone. We are going to get started here. Hello, 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 hello. Thank you all for being here so much. My name is Maureen Cool, and welcome to Show Up Chicago. We are so excited to have you here at this community gathering. You have already done a wonderful job of meeting your community members, but it is a community gathering and political panel show. So on behalf of my pals at Indivisible Blue Beginning, I am very excited to have the opportunity to welcome you here tonight. Whether you're our returner or here for the first time, we are so glad you came out. Thank you so much for being here. And a huge round of applause for the Hideout for hosting us. Thank you so much. Please get drinks, tip the bartenders. They are wonderful people, and we're so glad that we are here. I also want to start by giving a huge round of applause to all of the work that you guys have been doing. I personally, yes, a round of applause. Yes, thank you. I want to see if I get this going here. Oops, am I on? My clicker's not working. Sorry, let's try this way. There we go. Okay. Oops, sorry. 1 second, we've gone the wrong way. I'm so sorry, everyone. We've started at the end. Everyone close your eyes. Okay, there we go. Here we go. All right. Okay, so we'll do that again. A huge round of applause for everyone that went out to the Hands Off rally on April 5th. Thank you so much. You did awesome. I was so inspired by all of the people there, and especially all of the signs. I love to see some good signs. So great job, everybody. Also, a huge round of applause to everybody who participated in helping Susan Crawford win her Supreme Court race. What you guys are doing is working. We cannot stress that enough. Everything you're doing is working, and you are showing up, and we are so, so glad you are. Keep it up. Okay, so what is on our minds tonight? This evening, along with our guests, we are going to focus our energy on the law. Should be pretty simple, right? So just to make sure everyone's up to date, here's what you need to know. Oh, actually, sorry, this number says 100. I'm hearing that the number is actually over 200 lawsuits that Trump is involved in and the administration is involved in. And there's actually websites that are out there tracking the number of litigations in play. So very, very interesting. But these hundreds of lawsuits aren't just words on paper. They are people with real lives who are being affected by Trump and his administration. Oops, sorry, I keep going the wrong way.
In New Orleans, 2 families deported to Honduras. In one case, an undocumented mother with her American children, one just 4 years old with cancer. And in another case, an undocumented mother and her American 2-year-old daughter.
So things are very bad. The administration is deporting American citizens and furthermore calling for the impeachment of federal judges who rule against deportation orders. Who would have ever thought that this guy would be the one standing up against Trump? Not even him. Oh, sorry. Actually, I'm also hearing that we have a legal attack on higher education. And it isn't just Harvard. Right here in Illinois, the Trump administration is using the federal government to attack our institutions. He's freezing $790 million in funding for Northwestern in the name of anti-Semitism. So all in all, the administration is battling around 200 lawsuits in court on voting, education, regulatory bodies, and many more. And so far, he is losing most of them in the lower courts. It is feeling like even when we zoom in on just the law, there's still so many directions that we can focus our energy. And although I was named outstanding attorney at the Iowa State mock trial finals in 2007, we have 2 phenomenal guests here tonight who are experts on the actual law and can help us make better sense of what is happening. When everything feels like it's on fire, we need to turn to experts to help us prioritize what we need to focus on first. So I will leave it to Marge Halprin and Tom Moss, who are the co-leaders of Indivisible Blue Beginning. They will give our subject matter experts their proper introductions, but tonight we are going to get into the nitty-gritty with Sheila Bedi, a law professor at Northwestern, yes. And ACLU of Illinois' Ed Yohnka. We're so happy that they are here. Yes, give them a round of applause. They're going to be educating all of us on what we should be caring about the most. Then we will discuss how our Illinois state officials are fighting back and how people in this room can fight back. That's great. That's what we want to do. So tonight our panel is being recorded for a podcast and radio show, so time is tight, and so are our microphones. Marge and Tom will conduct the panel up here first, and our panelists will not be able to answer your questions during the show unless you've submitted them before in writing. But we will have an audience Q&A after the panel. So you should have a note card on your seat or somewhere near your seat. Please take the time, if you have a question, to write down some thoughts during the panel so that when we get to the Q&A, we're having like concise, good ideas that we've written down. So with that, I will pass it off to Marge and Tom. Thank you all so much for being here. We're very excited that you are.
All right, thank you, Maureen. And as our guests take the stage, it'll leave it to me just to do a quick welcome. Welcome to Show Up Chicago, a community gathering and political panel show presented monthly here at the Hideout. As Maureen said, I'm Tom Moss. This is Marge Halprin. We're part of the leadership team here at Blue Beginning. This month, it's a legal matter. What effect is the judiciary having in stopping or slowing Trump? If not the courts, will Trump pay attention to the court of public opinion? What is Illinois Attorney General Raoul doing to protect Illinois residents? And what can you do to join the legal fight against this madness? All of this and more as we are joined by our two legal experts, and I am going to stop standing up now and maybe try to sit down. Sheila Bedi is a clinical professor of law at the Northwestern Pritzker School of Law and director of the law school's Community Justice and Civil Rights Clinic. Bedi litigates civil rights claims on behalf of people who have endured police violence and abusive prison conditions, among many, many other good endeavors. A leading voice for, yes, please. What a fan club, that's wonderful, Sheila. A leading voice for the Illinois ACLU since 1999. Ed Yohnka is a fixture on local and national television and radio programs. He speaks out on behalf of countless ACLU lawsuits. Is it countless? You have a count?
It's countless.
It's countless and going up.
It's going up, actually.
Indeed. And he's also a fixture at many of our rallies. You may have seen Ed with us before. Ed, welcome. Sheila, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. And thank you all for being here.
All right, so let's dive in. At last count, there were 11 court rulings last week alone, and I think there were a couple more over the weekend that I didn't catch up on, against Trump's executive orders and actions to fulfill them. But Trump doesn't seem to care a lot about what the courts have to say, at least not the lower courts. So our first question is, what effect are the courts having in stopping or even slowing Trump and the MAGA agenda? Ed, you want to start?
Sure. First of all, thank you all. It's great to be here with you tonight. I think the lower courts are having two effects. I think while it is true that the administration seems to pretend that they can ignore the rulings, I think the two things that are happening are in many of the areas, they've been considerably slowed down from what they're able to do. For example, under their use of the Aliens Enemy Act of 1798, just to remember where we are. I think that they would have loved to have moved plane loads of people by now, like by the hour. And they have not been able to do that because of the litigation around that. I think just as one example. Likewise, I think by now they would have hoped to have broken the back of every healthcare provider in the country so that there would not be gender-affirming care available to anyone 19 years of age and under. They've tried to blackmail these institutions thus far. So I think we've seen that it's slowed down in that way. But I think the other element is that it has allowed people affected by these to tell their stories. And I think that has been really much more important in this process thus far in terms of, really making people aware of the harm that's being done by the brutality and the recklessness of this administration. And I think that is beginning to have an impact as we see, whether it's in polling, whether it's in the number of people who are coming out to events, or whether it's just in the fact that people are like, this isn't, sort of suggesting that this isn't what they bargained for.
That's good. Did you want to add something, Sheila?
Well, I'll just echo that I think the courts are at their most powerful when they are a platform for the people who are directly affected to access them and to tell their stories. And an example of that here in Illinois is in the lawsuit filed against Illinois, Cook County, the city of Chicago, around sanctuary cities and the work that we've been doing to try to ensure that that is not just governments fighting it out, but that people who are having to decide whether to access health care or risk being deported are in that struggle and that their voices are platformed.
So, Sheila, you've had some direct experience with the Trump administration and
true.
pushing back against that administration at the law clinic. Wonder if you could tell that story a little bit. What happened and how did you push back, and what lessons are there for us in all of that?
Briefly, of course.
All right,
You've
briefly. Well, I was actually working on the brief that I just mentioned, where we were filing it on behalf of organized communities against deportation and other immigrant rights groups, telling the stories of people who were going to be adversely affected if the sanctuary city laws were to be eradicated. And I got a call from my bosses, and they said, who my bosses are also my friends, my deans, have you seen the news? And I said, no, I haven't. I've been working on this brief calling Trump a racist and a white supremacist. I have not seen the news.
How many conversations start with "Have you seen the
Yes,
news"?
I mean, and then they sort of told me that I was named in this congressional inquiry. And the thing that was really interesting about my experience is that I'm a civil rights lawyer. I live to hold governments accountable, to file lawsuits against the federal government. And when I found out that I was being targeted, I knew that it was unlawful. But my first reaction was, okay, well, we'll give them a couple documents. Hopefully they'll go away. And I had to sort of live with that for a few days before I realized they're not going to go away. And this isn't just about me. It's about the communities that I work with and for. It's about who my work is in solidarity with. And that if I don't stand up, if we don't sort of call out this government overreach, it's not going to stop. So one of the real takeaways for me was sort of, given the fact that this is my career, it still took me a while to sort of get right with the idea that I'm going to sue both my employer and the federal government, and how important that was. So it gave me a whole new respect for my clients, and also, of course, this is what has to happen. There's no other option, but it's not easy, and it's not easy for me with all the privileges that I have. So sort of, really sitting with that has been a growth for me.
And this was a congressional subpoena,
Yes.
correct? So, but there's little light between the Trump administration and Congress at this point, or maybe you see it differently.
Very clear they're sharing information. Very clear. And it was withdrawn after my incredible legal team filed an emergency motion, but with sort of a threat to come back. And the hypothesis is they're coming back through the executive branch.
And it is the way you explain it. It's like blackmail, right? Because you give in to the first demand, and then they know they've got you, and they're going to give a second and a third demand, whether they're blackmailing you for money or for information.
Yeah.
So why is it, do you think, that others in the same position have chosen to cave? Other law firms, other universities, others in all different professions are like, yeah, okay, you want that here. And how do you think that's going to play out for them?
Well, I can say for the first few days where I thought I was going to cave, one of the things I was thinking was, okay, I've got my little clinic that does a whole lot of work, and I think is important, but then there are cancer trials for sick children at Lurie's Hospital. And how can we compare the sort of relative good? So it's understandable that the university is going to kind of, sell my clinic down the road for this larger, greater good. I think the realization that, of course, it's not going to stop there. And that this isn't actually about anti-Semitism. It's not actually about rooting out any kind of discrimination. It's about dismantling higher ed, because higher ed at its very best is a force for liberation. And that's what they're going after. And so that's why standing up was so important.
There's a reason why in the first campaign Trump said, "I love the undereducated," right? He meant it, and he still does. I have to say that's true. Ed, it occurs to us that while the administration is going after law firms and hospitals and universities and other institutions, unless we've missed it, the Act Blue is a target. But ACLU, have they filed a suit directly against ACLU?
We have not been the subject of an executive order yet. And I think "yet" is the operative word. There is lots of rumors flying around Washington, as you may know, about coming executive orders that target not-for-profits, and I think there is a chance, although who knows, that the ACLU may be on that list. But I think, thinking back to Sheila's story, I always think of this. First of all, I'm 65 years old now, so I live my entire life by anecdote. I grew up in a town of about 700 or 750 people. And I learned a lot of lessons there that stick with me. And the first one is, if the bully comes for your lunch money on Monday and you give it to him, he doesn't skip you on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And so, when you think about people who are trying to make these deals with the devil, those deals are not going to last. And I think, there's been this kind of thing of, I think, where people think, well, let's just get something down. Let's see if we can move on, and go forward. But that isn't working that way because, as Sheila said, they see law firms, they see institutions of higher learning, they see not-for-profit organizations that challenge them. They see those as the obstacles to their authoritarianism. They see them as the obstacles to a world they could never achieve through the small d democratic process. And so the way they intend to do it is through bullying and blackmail.
As I was saying to Tom earlier today, their vision is survival of the richest.
Yes.
So, Ed, just like so many of us in this room have recognized the power of organizing, so too at least universities. We hear today that the Big Ten, for instance, is organizing to maybe push back a little bit.
They're making me root for Ohio State. I mean,
Oh, man.
Jeez.
Ed, this is a bad time to tell you something.
These are bad times. These are dark times, Tom. These are dark times.
I've got some bad news for you, Ed. OH.
Oh.
I see no one has picked that up, Tom.
Yeah, right. I know. I'm in the wrong room.
Thank you for that.
So what do you make of that? Is that a useful strategy?
I think yes is the short answer. I think that in much the same way that, as the law firms have begun to pull together, now that Jenner is challenging this and others, I think you're going to start to see, as the institutions gather, there is just so much more power in more people saying no. To borrow the line from Succession, these are not really serious people in this administration. And the idea that they're going to work hard enough to work through litigation for hundreds of institutions, they just don't have the energy for it. Because they can't get off Twitter, for God's sake. So I think at the end of the day, I think this is an incredibly useful tool.
So as March said, I'm sorry, that Trump's strategy is to send everything through the courts and up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has been a mixed bag at this point, and you were mentioning to me over here earlier before the show that there may be some cases that are more likely to have a decent ruling for the Trump administration than others. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I probably should defer to Sheila on this one, but never late to offer an opinion. I think what we'll see is where the court can expand the power of the presidency, especially for a Republican president, they will try to do it. I think where the court sees that presidency infringing on their power, I think this court will be reluctant to. Because for all of the talk about calling balls and strikes, I think the thing that really is marked about the Roberts Court is the desire to always be the decider. for them to always decide what words mean, what statutes mean, what circumstances are, and to always hold open something for parties to have to come back to them. I do not think this court will want to cede as much power to Donald Trump as Donald Trump would like them to.
Sheila, do you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, I think it's clear that Roberts doesn't want to preside over a constitutional crisis, right? He's somebody who thinks of himself as a serious person and really cares about how history is going to reflect him. I think there's a real danger, though, in the sort of liberal conceit that we have to go back to the rule of law, and I'm very concerned about that, of that being our touchstone, because the rule of law a year ago, or the rule of law 6 months ago, still allowed over 2 million people to be incarcerated, most of them black, many of them for nonviolent offenses, right? So the idea that the rule of law is going to save us now, or it could have saved us then, I think is incredibly dangerous.
So what should a progressive hope for in terms of, if not returning to, what's the future? What should we be pushing for?
Well, I think it's a recognition that government overreach and government abuse is government overreach and government abuse. And it existed before the Trump presidency. And what we're seeing now is that the law has historically been a tool to protect those who are in power. And many people, like myself, were better protected in December. And I can't, want protections for myself if I'm not recognizing that this happened because we allow the law to protect some people but not others. And so I'm interested in us changing the paradigm and focusing on outcomes, right? What is it that we want? What is our vision of what society should be? Not focused on some fair process. I'm not interested in a fair process that allows 2-year-olds to be deported.
So how does this relate to the whole question of due process? We have Abrego Garcia, who has been deported without due process, without any process, still winding its way through the courts rather slowly. It's all going very slowly. There's reason to think this could be the most important case to watch at the moment, because a lot of other things will fall from it. If he's not entitled to due process, if American citizens and legal residents can be snapped up from the street, any of us can. Is this your number one case? I know it might be hard to choose, but is this the domino that will knock down all the others if we lose it?
I mean, it's hard to pick one, but I think it has the potential to demonstrate sort of how flimsy a concept due process is and how few protections we had. And I think it might be sort of a terrifying truth-telling tool. And that's my fear, is that it's really going to, less than sort of affirming the lawlessness of the Trump administration, but more reveal sort of just how illusory so many of these protections have been.
I agree, and I think when I think about this, when you think in the Abrego Garcia case, that there's this instance of, the Trump administration tells one story in public and a different story in their court filings. And I think if ultimately the courts allow them to do that, I agree with Sheila. I think we've revealed this truth that probably, I shouldn't say probably, we know happens, whether it's at 26th in California or somewhere else, every single day. And, we've just really sort of suggested that we just accept that as being the way it is. I think that would be, really dangerous for everyone in the way that it's already dangerous for millions of people today.
So related to that, we saw the rendition of children who are U.S. citizens over the weekend, supposedly at their mother's request, but they signed something that no one was in the room to know if they knew what they were signing, or they weren't even asked, or, it's a very confusing surrounding. But it seemed to me that ICE is actually enacting Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. It's all kicked off late in the week, last week, with a rant from Stephen Miller about birthright citizenship and how much garbage that is, and anchor babies, or whatever his language was. And then it was followed by testing that theory and picking up U.S. citizens who are too young to speak up for themselves against the wishes of the citizen parents or whatever. Is that your take? And if so, where are we headed? I mean, we think birthright citizenship is enshrined in the Constitution. We'll see whether the Supreme Court ultimately agrees or rewrites the Constitution in the way they seem to like to do. But in the meantime, is that what you think is happening, and they're going to keep testing birthright citizenship in this way? Or am I more afraid than I need to be?
I think you may be giving them more credit than they may deserve. I mean, in terms, although they've certainly been more organized and disciplined this round than they have been. I'm certain that's at the root of it. I'm certain that is part of. I mean, it's clearly been a mandate from this administration. I think that there has still been this kind of overlay of chaos and the distinction between kind of what's happening in the executive orders and then how the agencies are implementing them or not. So I think the question of how coordinated they are really remains open for me.
I think I'm willing to meet you maybe halfway. I think because I agree with Sheila. I think that we see a lot of chaos kind of from region to region in terms of the way that these orders are being implemented. And there appears to be, just looking from the outside, there appears to be a little more some districts, ICE districts or ICE regions that are sort of adhering more closely, trying to meet certain quotas, trying to do that in where that's not happening in other places. But I also think that they may have stumbled onto something here, which is, by targeting people who have U.S. citizen children, then they can make the case that, well, y'all complained when we did family separation, so we're not going to do that. So we've got no other choice than to deport these children who are U.S. citizens, and I think there's something in there that they're going to use as a little bit of a shield to justify some of their actions as well.
So birthright citizenship is in the Constitution. So what possible legal arguments would they have to present to the Supreme Court about what seems to be a constitutional fact?
Well, it's a stretch. And I would say it was, their argument is based on a sort of a novel, I'm not sure novel's the right word, but sort of a fringe conservative legal theory that the birthright citizenship requirement of the 14th Amendment hinged on these words about being under the jurisdiction of the United States, and their argument being that if you cannot, if you're not a documented resident, then you are technically not under the jurisdiction. They've got lots of problems because, of course, the amendment itself doesn't say that. Statutes that have been passed in the wake of that don't say that. A Supreme Court decision, in 1895 or 1898 doesn't say that as well. And you've had this series of things, where people have accepted. In fact, the debate over the 14th Amendment literally acknowledged that people born here to non-citizens would be citizens. So you've got all of this working against it, but that is effectively their theory. And, even at that, of course, the idea being that the president can somehow issue an executive order to reinterpret the Constitution in this novel way, and that we're all just supposed to say, yeah, that's right, because that's what they meant, by dividing and separating the powers, I think is something that really does stretch credulity almost as much as their argument itself.
Yeah, well, just the other issue with so many of the legal strategies here is Trump's Twitter or social media or whatever it is that he's using, and the way he sort of told on himself, and the way he makes it clear his racial animus, and how so much of what he's doing is motivated by his hatred for people who are not white. And that's relevant in so much of what the administration is putting out, from their animus towards sanctuary cities to everything that they're saying about immigrants. And that is some of the kind of evidence that helped with the last term's Muslim ban litigation. And we're going to see it surfacing here more and more, his own words being weaponized against him, because so much of this is just explicitly white supremacist rhetoric.
Now, as Ed mentioned earlier, though, the Supreme Court is extremely fond of executive authority, and we've seen some backstories in the last week or so that indicate that actually Roberts is the one really pushing for expanding executive authority. At least that's some of the news reports we've seen. So how do you expect him to balance? Is this such an extreme case that he can't give Trump any authority in this area? And where do you think the lines will be drawn on executive authority on all of these orders? Is there a way to answer that question that is so general but specific?
I don't know that there is a way to fully answer that. I mean, I think, and I think there is a danger at sort of looking at legal principles and sort of assuming that there is something that we can apply here that's going to allow us to predict the outcome. Right? We are in extraordinary times, and these are not legal issues. This is about a political movement that has taken over the courts in some respects. And what is the answer to that? What can we do when the ultimate deciders have been captured in many perspectives, and that the law has never functioned to protect those without power? Sort of what are the options? Like, those are the questions that I feel like should be animating us. I'll say to your question, I do think Roberts is going to does not want to be thought of, doesn't want the history books to describe him as Trump's lackey. I really don't think that that's how he's going to want to go down in the history books. I also think he's going to feel like he owes the conservative movement something. And so I think we need to look less at the legal principles and more sort of what is animating the humans who are involved here. And I think that then we can sort of make our best guesses here.
I think the other answer, I guess, which is a bit of a dodge, but the other answer I would give is, I hate to predict. I would be loath to predict how far they'll go, given the fact that I couldn't 2 years ago have imagined they'd go so far as the immunity decision. And so when you think about that as being part of the baseline that's now being cooked into all of this, and as Sheila points out, with this literally this political movement that has populated our highest court, I think that it's a real question about where all of that takes us, and I don't know what that looks like in a year or 2 years.
So the related question to that is, even when the Supreme Court decides to hold the line and support the Constitution as we've known it, what do they do if the administration doesn't follow it? We had Judge Boasberg threatening to hire a private attorney to prosecute contempt charges against administration officials. Trump is immune, but nobody who works for him is, and he'll throw them all under the bus if he has to. We know that about him. But can they do that? Can the courts in some way enforce their laws without controlling the U.S. Marshals or any other policing force in the country? How do they enforce if it comes to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's another complicated question. I mean, theoretically, the court has really powerful contempt powers, and would have the ability to have impose civil and criminal contempt penalties. The likelihood of that happening against the president of the United States, it does seem unthinkable, and it does seem like it conflicts with so many of the values of the court. But theoretically, that's why we have the balance of power, right? That's why we have checks and balances. That's why we've got these separate branches of government. And just the one other thing I'll say about the court is that when we look at the history of the court, we look at sort of all of the landmark decisions, Brown, Terry, it's very clear that the justices are reading the news. They are trying to, they don't just sort of stand above and are removed from society, right? They are engaged with the debates of the day. And that's why it is so important for people's voices and those who are not down with what this administration is doing, those who are refusing to allow this horrific scapegoating of immigrants to divide us, why it's so important for those voices to be heard. Because even though it's not a legal argument, we've Supreme Court historians talk about how there's all of this evidence that the justices do engage with popular culture, and of course they're affected by it. So that that's why gatherings like this are so important, and that's why what is happening in the media is so important.
And I think building on that the other element of this is that, at the end of the day, and speaking not to the people in this room, but broadly speaking to our friends and family who exist out there in the world, the one thing people don't like is people who don't follow the rules. And I think as more of these kinds of rulings and decisions come down, that, one of the great vulnerabilities is, people like you showing up in the streets and proclaiming and declaiming the fact that they are not following the rules. And the truth is that for all of the cocooning and bubbling and siloing that they try to do about information to keep that from people figure that out sooner or later, right? People figure out that they're not following the rules and that people are pissed about it. And that does land with a wider audience of folks. And that's why, again, groups like this, being in the streets, going out and protesting these things and sending those messages, talking to your friends and neighbors. If anybody wants to volunteer to take my sister to talk to, I'll be glad to turn her over. I mean, that's the kind of thing that really is critically important. And I think, again, it is more fuel and more fodder for the courts to stand up and be strong.
Sheila, I think it was you who a few moments ago mentioned the term constitutional crisis. Now, I remember the very first Indivisible rally I attended in 2017. Mike Quigley got up and talked about the possibility of a constitutional crisis. And every time, periodically ever since then, we've been talking about a constitutional crisis, but the goalposts seem to keep moving. So my question is, when will we know if we are in a constitutional crisis? I feel like we've been in a constitutional crisis since he came down the escalator in 2015.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I mean, I think we are in a constitutional crisis, unquestionably. I also think we have been in a constitutional crisis, right? The fact that the Eighth Amendment is interpreted to allow mass incarceration to grow the way it does. I would argue that's a constitutional crisis. The fact that the Fourth Amendment exists in the way that allows the kind of police violence to happen unaccountable, that is a constitutional crisis. And so what we're seeing now is a refusal of the federal government to sort of follow its own laws, or the laws that so many of us have gotten used to, and so it feels jarring. But I think we have to analyze this in the context of how limited these protections have been. And what's happening right now is that many more of us are getting caught up in it. But the Constitution has functioned to provide very little protections for the most vulnerable amongst us for a very long time. And that, I think, is the definition of a constitutional crisis. If the Constitution is not protecting the people who need it the most, what good is it?
And I would say, just to pick up on this, I mean, just to be specific, if you are a black motorist in Danville, Illinois, you've been in a constitutional crisis for years because you can't go to the grocery store without being stopped. If you're a trans kid in, some places in the Metro East area, and you're just trying to get your, be affirmed as who you are in your public schools, there's been a constitutional crisis and a legal crisis for a long time. I think there's no question that, that is a reality and has been a reality, and it is why, the work of folks like Sheila's clinic is never done, because that's, that work will always be there. What I'll say is I think in terms of whether or not we're in a constitutional crisis with the president and the courts and et cetera, I think when you look at, the Alien Enemies Act case, when you look at the Abrego Garcia case, whenever anybody asks me this question, I don't know that I've ever said this publicly, but privately, I will always say, I think our canoe has gone over the waterfall. I don't think we know if we're going to land up or down yet. And I think that's what we're still trying to figure out.
Is it rhetorically useful to stop saying we're on a knife's edge? I mean, we need to start saying that the canoe is tipped over. We are in a constitutional crisis.
Well, I think to pick up on the point that Sheila's made, I think it's also time to stop saying that we need to save democracy, because hell, we need to fix democracy. I mean, democracy wasn't working the way it was.
That was Bernie Sanders' message, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the, and I think in a whole range of ways that we can look at that. So I think that yes, it's time to stop saying knife's edge. I think it is time to stop catastrophizing about this person. I think it's also time to stop with the idea that this is some sort of strong man. He is the weakest human being I have ever seen in my life. He can't stand up to Vladimir Putin. He can't stand up to the tin pot dictator of El Salvador. He can't stand up to Elon Musk or Stephen Miller, for God's sakes. And he can't stand up to, some addled brain RFK Jr. So the idea that this is a strong man that we should all be fearful of, it just strikes me as, this is the weakest human being that one can imagine, because his narcissism allows him to be pushed and pulled in any direction.
And maybe he can't stand up to the ACLU, and that's why you haven't seen that executive order yet. No, I'm not joking. I hope that's true. I want to come back to something you mentioned just in passing earlier, Ed, and that is this whole anti-Semitism thing that is happening. It's. I want to say, as a Jewish person, every time MAGA proclaims they're protecting us against anti-Semitism, I feel less safe. When they go after universities in my name, I know that I am less safe. And I don't know how many in the room are also Jewish people who have this feeling, or even if you're not. But he's using us, and he's using this until he doesn't want us in the country anymore either, and then he'll come after us. I have no doubt about that. But what do you think is the impact of this crusade? You said also that eventually people figure it out. Is the public buying it, or are they feeling, yes, these are all anti-Semitic institutions, Trump is doing the right thing on that front?
Well, let me start with the fact that if Donald Trump wanted to fight anti-Semitism, the first thing he might do is not have dinner with Nick Fuentes and Kanye.
Yes, please. Or he might not let Musk raise his arm in that most offensive manner and joke about it.
Let me rewind for a second. I think that all of us, and I count myself and the ACLU in this, I think all of us did not do enough to push back against this narrative last spring during the encampments. I think we let a narrative spread that there was this dangerous, horrible thing happening when students were just expressing themselves, many of whom about something they felt very dearly and about which family members were dying. And I think the idea that we let that sort of launch as a narrative, first of all, was a failing on many of our parts, and for that I raise my hand, because I don't think that I don't think even from the platform of the ACLU, I don't think we push back hard enough about that. And I think that problem is that we start from that hole because we didn't. And when you say, will people get it? I think they will. It may take us longer because we didn't do that work when we should have. And so I think we've got a lot more, sort of explaining and convincing and talking to do to point out just how empty this is. This isn't about anti-Semitism, as has been clear. This is about, places which may, for example, we may have research institutions who will figure out that people were not eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio, and so you don't want that. You want something you can control. And this is just the lever that's being used.
And isn't the parallel to that the fact that there wasn't enough pushback on the idea that if you can support Jews, you can support Israel and not support Netanyahu, not support what Israel's doing right now. And in fact, a large number of Israelis living in Israel do not support what he's doing and would agree with these protesters on campus. We didn't make that clear enough either, right? Sheila, what else can be done about it?
No, I think that's right, and I do think this is a moment where you know the emperor having no clothes is becoming to be very apparent. I mean, in my own case, the letter announcing the investigation into my clinics, made allegations of anti-Semitism because I represent people who were protesting in solidarity with Gaza. And what the Congress asked for, so there were sort of these allegations of anti-Semitism and left progressive advocacy relating to policing. And then they asked for my budget, my donors, my personnel file. They asked for no proof that I have a classroom where students routinely say it is fair, it is equitable, it is open. They did not ask for my teaching evaluations. They didn't ask for anything that could have demonstrated what I take a lot of pride in, which is that I teach people who have all kinds of political backgrounds, and I hope that they learn something, and I don't require that they, adhere to my politics in order to get an A. And so the lack of sort of fit for purpose, and the fact that they were using this hook to try to chill, to try to intimidate, was really clear to some of my colleagues who definitely don't share my politics. And so I think the more they begin to overreach in that way and sort of are using this cover of anti-Semitism, the more the truth of it just being pretext is out there. And then the other thing I think is happening is that anti-Semitism is a real thing, and so there are people who are experiencing anti-Semitism who don't feel protected, as you said, because it's just being weaponized in this way that's entirely fake.
I want to make sure we have some time to talk about some more local and state issues. But first, reading the news is like drinking from a fire hose. How do you decide what you need to pay more attention to than everything else that you could pay attention to?
Any guidelines that could help us all out? Because we're dying here.
Ed and I talked about British detective shows as one outlet.
Yeah. I have a 2-month-old granddaughter, my first grandchild, so that helps a lot. I think actually it is, Tom, to be truthful. I think it's if I can tell a story on myself. I think one of the things I learned from the first Trump administration was not to chase every squirrel. I have somewhere, I should have brought it with me if I'd have known I was going to tell this story. I have the most beautifully, artfully crafted statement condemning the pardon of Joe Arpaio, which was Trump's first pardon when he was president. Who the hell cares about him pardoning Joe Arpaio? I mean, I care, but like literally is the ACLU of Illinois, who cares, right? And I think it's that kind of thing, is staying focused on the things that actually affect the clients we serve, the people who are really being harmed, and not getting into every political brawl that that's out there to be gained with this administration. And so, I think that, and then just sort of being able to try to parse, not to take everything that he says and go right to an 11. But find the things that are really important and are breadcrumbs to where he's actually going, and try to focus on those.
Sheila, you got any tricks for us?
Well, I mean, my one trick I would say is that the executive orders are posted on the website, and they are written in a fairly clear manner, and the media often gets it wrong. So going directly to the website, looking at these executive orders, getting a sense of what is actually being said has been important for me.
And wouldn't you say, and I thought you were going to say, so many of the executive orders are just press releases that aren't really anything that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. Some of them are just meaningless. They read almost like op-eds, and so they'll be op-eds. They forgot this is recorded.
Ones, right?
And I'm in litigation against Congress, so I need to be careful. But I do think actually looking at the language, even if you have no legal training, just looking at the language is helpful.
Although I will add, if anybody can figure out the science they're trying to describe in the gender identity executive order, I will give you $5, because I still to this day can't figure out what the heck they're talking about.
Yeah, not reality, that's for sure. We do want to move in a little bit to talk about the more impactful ways that states and others are fighting back, but particularly at the state level, first of all, because our own Attorney General, Kwame Raoul, has been one of the leading voices and leading attorney generals involved in these multi-state lawsuits. I'm a little sad to know that some of them don't cover states unless they're in the lawsuit. That's an intricacy of the law that we probably don't have time for you to explain to us now, except to say that since the red states aren't in it, oh well. But otherwise, those are successful, I think. What do you think about, for instance, I know that we filed against, that is in our name, Raoul has filed trying to protect our Social Security records. A lot of the anti-DOJ suits are coming from the states because it's the state residents that are impacted. So healthcare data, Social Security, they've filed now more recently against tariffs. Are these more promising because they come from the states? And what are the benefits of having the states be out front like that?
I mean, I think it's incredibly important, both as a legal matter, that these are arguably unlawful, and but also I think it's about building a political movement. And they are creating speed bumps. We've talked about the Supreme Court. Who knows what's going to happen there? But having these elected officials, use their power to take the federal government to court, it's an important thing. And there is something that is kind of beautifully democratic, kind of small d democratic about filing a lawsuit, because the federal government has to answer for what it's done, no matter what, right? The federal government has to answer for what it's done. And just that process, even if the ultimate lawsuit may not be successful, is an important exercise in building power. So, I mean, I think that it should be happening more. I think that there are, as we learned at the beginning, there's, hundreds of lawsuits. I think there easily could be thousands, and there really should be. The other thing is that these lawsuits, when governments file them, they can do it on behalf of the people they serve, so they can cure some of the tricky standing kind of procedural issues that groups like the ACLU or my clinic may have when we are trying to build cases. And then the last thing I'll say is that those lawsuits are most powerful when they are done in coordination with communities that are directly affected. They lose their power when you just have two governments sort of arguing over the intricacies of the law. That when they are really grounded in the experiences of people who are harmed, I think that they are a really important power-building move.
And I think to that last point, I think that's why it's so critical, whether it's the ACLU or other groups who've been part of this democracy forward, Lambda legal in some cases, other groups around the country. I think it's really critical that when the government just files those as, the government itself, to find folks from impacted communities and to make sure that those, either through amicus briefs or directly in other lawsuits, are part of it. The one other thing, and I think it goes to the power building point, that I think has really been great about what the way the states have responded. If you remember in the first Trump administration around the Muslim ban and other things, you might get, 3 or 4 states or 5 states or more who would sign on. You've got this multiple of 18 or 19 who are filing on to almost every lawsuit, and they're, sharing the work among the offices. And I think that in itself has been a really important thing in terms of sending a signal about the level of resistance to this that is out there actually in state government that's doing the work, of trying to operate under whatever these crazy rules are that are being put into place.
All the more reason to be proud of our Attorney General for stepping up, right?
So Republicans are all about states' rights until they're not, right? I mean, the whole Roe v. Wade was states, let the states do it. The states can be in the best position to decide. So now there seems to be a land grab from the states, and so it's not convenient now for the Trump administration to support states' rights. So maybe it's a basic question, but maybe it's not. I mean, what literally can the states do? What power do they have in this scenario at the moment?
Well, I mean, they've got a lot of power by virtue of what the federal law says, right? But then we do have this very strange scenario where, for example, the federal government is trying to commandeer local law enforcement to enforce immigration law. And the arguments that we are making against that is that it is, commandeering local law enforcement, that you are trying to impose and essentially take over what is an inherently local function, and that violates the Constitution. It can't happen. And it's very strange, sort of as a civil rights lawyer, to be making this argument that sort of states should be having the authority to police as they want to. I mean, there's something that really I find offensive, given my view on policing, but it's also a well-established principle. And I think it does demonstrate that what is guiding this administration is not some sort of deep analysis of the legal ins and outs, but it is a political movement, right? It's not just about the individual that Trump is. It's about a larger political movement. It's about the headlines that can be generated when Trump says, I went into those large blue cities, I took over their police force, now they are deporting all of these people, right? It's about wanting that headline. And I think that the fact that now you also have the federal government trying to reach into schools in terms of the anti-DEI initiatives,
Courtrooms.
and courtrooms, is it sort of does suggest that we are on the opposite side of what states' rights mean, right? That we've sort of done a shift from states' rights really being a tool of the conservative to being about now that's what progressives need to cling to.
But let me say one other thing. I think that this is an opening for us in terms of at the state level, look, in Illinois, we saw Dobbs coming before Dobbs got here, right? And we took all the actions that we needed to do to ensure that abortion would continue to be safe and legal in Illinois. We need to do that with a range of other things, I think, as these orders come down, as this picture begins to fill in. Just one issue that we've been working on in Springfield is around health data privacy, right? One of the things that when they try to enforce these laws from other states to keep people from traveling here, one of the things that's going to be critical is that everybody who receives care in Illinois, that their health data privacy is protected. And so I think it's things like that we can do at the state level, we can do at the local level, and we really need to do that. I say not only to resist what's happening at the federal level, but we also ought to be, in a place like Illinois, we ought to be a beacon for other states about what it can really look like.
So that's what the state legislature can do. Ed, you talked earlier about educate, or I think Sheila Ed talked about educating ourselves about what the executive orders actually say. I suppose if we wanted to have a recurring donation to the ACLU, you wouldn't send it back, Ed. But what else? I think what we're really hungry for is what we can do leaving here tonight, starting tomorrow morning. What can we do to help you affect these legal changes that we all want?
Well, just to go off of Ed's last point, the Constitution is a floor. So our local governments can always provide us with more protections, always. And ensuring that both at the city, county, and state level that happens. Ed just gave a great example, I think is really important. One of the dangers of having somebody like Trump is that we might take our foot off the gas when it comes to our local elected officials, and that's incredibly, incredibly dangerous. So ensuring that we are not losing traction on progressive change that's happening in Chicago or Cook County is really important.
School boards, aldermen, police boards.
Yes, exactly. And recognizing again, as I said, that sort of the absence of the rule of law and constitutional crisis did not start when Trump took office. And so the work that we were doing before around policing, around imprisonment, around the rights of labor, that work still needs to happen, and that we can't lose sight of the local work. One of, I think, the real tragedies of the last Trump administration was the over-focus on what was happening at the federal level that really took away some of the focus on more local efforts. So I think staying focused on local is so important in this moment.
And that is such a great point. And I think again, as you say, town councils, local officials, school boards, library boards, all of those places, all of these people, if they haven't already, are going to face the coercion of this administration, even if there isn't anything in those on those agendas right now. Showing up and making clear what you want as a policy, what the ideal is, in terms of respecting rights and liberties across the board is really critical to do now, to set that groundwork now, before the MAGA mob shows up and tries to get them to change some policy.
That's great. We saw that with libraries and banned books and other things we didn't see coming.
Yeah.
Every single unit of government.
And Marge, if people wanted to get involved with Indivisible or Blue Beginning, what would you recommend they do?
Well, I'm glad you asked. You can you can go to indivisiblechicago.com. You can go to bluebeginning.com and sign up to get information from us. Indivisible Chicago will let you know when rallies and other things are coming up. You may already know or you wouldn't be in this room, but we'll also send you every day 2 or 3 very quick things you can do. I would also suggest, and if you sign up for Blue Beginning, of course, you're going to get notice of more events here at the Hideout and elsewhere. I'd also suggest you download the 5 Calls app. If it is not yet on your phone, it should be. It will help you call your members of Congress and give you scripts on every imaginable topic. There's so many scripts and so much information. Do call, even though you think here we're in our blue bubble and our lawmakers support what we want them to support. They need to know that you want them to do that, and we've certainly seen a lot of stronger positions come from Dick Durbin and others who were staying in the shadows for a while. Tammy Duckworth is who she is today because we call her and ask her to be. So 5 Calls app is something I think is an important thing to do.
You'll see posters around the room with QR codes, and that'll also provide some more information. We're going to wrap up our broadcast here. So Show Up Chicago is hosted by Blue Beginning Chapter of Indivisible Chicago, as well as our friends here at the Hideout Inn. Special thanks to Katie and Tim Tutton, Jody Boltman, Avery Reel, and the terrific staff at the Hideout. They deserve a big round of applause. Also, our sound engineer. Our sound engineer here at the Hideout is the great Olivia Brunel. Thank you, Olivia. John Freeberg manages our broadcasting and our recording. Thanks also to Lewis University for tech support. And thanks to WCPT's Matt Cummings, Tim Hogan, and Mark Pinsky for broadcasting Show Up Chicago, Sunday nights, 7 p.m. Thanks to the Blue Beginning team, which in addition to Marge and me, includes Chloe Madvig, Maureen Kuhl, Nick Rabkin, and Mike Lenahan. So ends our broadcast. Thank you so much for coming. What a great treat to see so many people coming out here on a Monday night. It's wonderful to see you. Thank you so much and have a great night.
All right,
Did I not
okay.
thank our guests?
Oh, my goodness.
Oh my God.
You can edit that back in.
All right, we'll have a moment for editing here. We'd like to thank our guests, Ed Yohnka from the ACLU.
Woohoo!
And Sheila Bedi from the Northwestern Law Clinic. With so many people from your fan club, I wouldn't have made it out of here tonight. Thanks
You'd
again
have
for
all been
coming.
Bob. Maureen is going to come up and manage our Q&A, and maybe while she's coming up, I can slip in one more question of my own, which is, if you know me, that's who's laughing, right? People who know I'm going to do that. Well, we talk so much about the importance of the state lawsuits to represent constituents. Have I missed something here? Why aren't the Democratic members of Congress suing to get their own authority back when their laws are being impounded illegally by Trump? I know the GOP Congress isn't going to do it. Why aren't the Democrats in Congress unified against around a lawsuit like that?
The lawmakers suing the executive branch because of interference with their own authority, their own legislative authority. That's an interesting. I don't know. It's a really.
I think that the House actually requires a majority of the House to vote in favor of a lawsuit being. I think there may be a House rule that actually requires that. So I think that's one of the reasons you're not seeing it, because it would actually require the majority to sue the Trump administration.
So even though they represent us in a district, they can't file a suit on behalf of their district.
When individual members have sued the president or sued in the past, a lot of these standing issues have come up about, who is actually, whose authority is being affected or how it's being impacted. And so there's been limitations on the ability to bring some of those lawsuits.
Yeah, an individual member definitely couldn't sue.
Yeah.
So in order to sort of assert the general authority, you need to have a critical mass. What I don't know is whether or not there could be some sort of caucus type lawsuit.
That's a really great question. I was thinking about like the analog being in some ways that, you know, they've had to vote as a House to even refer a contempt citation to the Department of Justice. I think that there may be a rule that covers this as well. I'm sorry, I'm speculating a little bit about that, but I seem to remember there may be something like that that's keeping them from doing it. You know, I mean, I think it does beg the question in some ways. I mean, it's one of the things, you know, do we even essentially have a Congress right now? I mean, when they simply sit by while the president takes their authority away and, you know, seem to cheer him on, I don't, you know, you have to ask yourself whether or not, I mean, we used to have these people, they were called legislators. You may have heard of them, you know, who actually did things. And I just don't see that happening right now.
Well, I'd only add that it feels a little bit to me like even if there is that kind of rule, why are Democrats still following the rules?
Yeah, I mean, there's, again, like we talked about, the sort of political moment that could be created by such a lawsuit, even if there's some technical interpretation that might get it kicked out. It would be really a powerful
It's a heck of a
moment.
good press release if that's as far as they get.
I was just going to say, you actually get a moment to argue the case, if nothing else, in the court of public opinion. I agree. I think that's, you know,
Okay, I'm going to stay down here, but we'll start with our first question right here. Can you tell me your name, please? Oh, she's going to stand up. I'm going to hold the microphone.
I'm Robin Potter. I'm a labor and employment lawyer from Chicago. Thank you. That was great. Wonderful. Sheila is amazing, and so thank you.
And Ed is no slouch.
Ed is also amazing.
She didn't put me up to this, everyone. So I thank you, but in context, wouldn't you say that our history is one where mass movements and the power of the people have changed this society and can transform it, not the law, not the courts. The civil rights movement moved the courts. I heard someone say the other day, and Sheila, if you can comment, because we have May Day starting on Thursday, which Indivisible has endorsed, which we hope to put 50,000 or 100,000 people on the street. That's where history's made. Not with Judge Roberts having an epiphany that we have fascism in this country. And so I know everyone in this room will show up, stand up, and fight when this government is criminalizing dissent, has laid off 2 million federal employees, had tried to fire our sister over here, which was stopped by people in this room organizing to support her, not because the courts are one of justice or anything like that. So would you say it's a little off-kilter to say to people that the courts are where power is made, where history is made, where justice is made? And in light of Sheila's comments, I mean, we have the first civil rights movement on slave ships.
We're not going to have time for an answer.
I'll just say amen.
Thank you. So yes, if you have written down a question, please feel free to show me your blue card. Also, please feel free to get a drink. Tip your bartenders. We are going to keep our panelists here for a little bit, but we also would encourage discussion. We have a blue card right here. You want me to read it, or do you want to read it? Oh, she wants me to read it. Oh my goodness. What is your name, ma'am?
Mary Pat.
Mary Pat, it's very nice to meet you. Is Trump the essence of the problem, or is the problem the extreme conservative faction of the GOP that is using Trump to attempt to enact their agenda, i.e. Project 2025?
I think that's such a good question. And, you know, I was thinking about it when Ed was describing Trump as incredibly weak. And, you know, when we talk about movement, we're often talking about progressive movement, but we're ignoring the fact that the right also has an incredibly effective movement. When we look at what they did with Dobbs, with the right for, the right to abortion, that was a long game, incredibly disciplined movement that had messaging, that had organizing, that had a legal strategy, all working together to reinforce each other. And that's happening on multiple spheres. So I think that in many ways Trump is sort of absolutely a proxy for this movement, and that it's dangerous to underestimate a movement, whether it is on the right or the left. And so I think that's one of the things that actually scares me the most about this, is that this is very much about a very powerful movement on the right.
I think back. I think back to my time in 1987. I was with the American Bar Association, and we would go to these large annual and mid-year meetings, and there'd be this little guy running around talking to all the conservative members of the ABA, and I always thought, what a joke. It was Leonard Leo. It wasn't a joke. And that work from 40 years ago, this is his moment. And I think that, Trump both embodies it, I think he fuels it. I think they do clearly figure out ways to weaponize his grievances towards their ends. So I think it works in both ways in many respects.
Awesome. We did also get a question submitted during the show. This question was asking about with Doge not having a physical office or staff, is it possible to legally go after them? Is the nature of the question. Is that even possible?
Yes, is the short answer. There is, I think, a lot of mythology around who can sue or be sued, and you don't have to be incorporated. You don't have to have a physical presence. You can be a collective that's working together towards a common aim. The Doge is absolutely suable. They're going to argue they're not, but absolutely suable.
And one of the tools that the ACLU and other groups have done is starting by trying to file FOIA requests to get information about what Doge is doing. That is, of course, just the first step, ultimately, to look at where they're violating federal privacy laws, federal employment laws, and other things, and being able to bring those matters into court and again, into public light. It will not surprise you that the most transparent administration in the history of the country is not very transparent when it comes to their pet project of Doge. And so, that it's going to take a while to sort of work through the process of getting that information, but that will be part of it, and they certainly are suable.
Thank you. We have a question right here. Ma'am, what is your name?
My name is Nancy. How probable is a third term?
I don't know. I can't. I mean, yeah.
I think, back to Robin's point, I mean, the answer to that is going to be about the collective movement, and sort of it's not a legal answer. It's about, what is the outrage that we're going to see on the streets.
Then my next question fits in. How important are his approval numbers when it comes to the Congress and the courts? Are they affected at all by those numbers?
Well, I'm not a political consultant, but I like to play one when I'm at the Hideout. I think when you think about the approval numbers, you ought to think about sort of three groups of people. The first is that group of people who haven't come to a rally, who haven't been somewhere already, who are beginning to get the sense that, hey, wait a second, my grocery prices aren't down, my 401k is tanking, and this dude is chaos. And I think, that they may be much more likely to join into opposition, to protest, and look at other issues like the immigration outrages and other things like that. I think the more we can tell the story of 2-year-old U.S. citizens being deported, I think that moves the needle for that group. I think the second group, to be quite candid, is for mainly for Senate, but I think also for House Democrats, to give them a spine for further opposition and for not giving in on spending issues and things of that nature. And then I think there are those, especially California and New York Republican electeds in the House, who they have got to be looking at their own numbers and how much of the plank do they want to walk to, cut billions of dollars from Medicaid to fund a tax cut for Elon Musk. And I think when Trump's numbers are down, his ability to coerce them or push them, is reduced. And so I think they are important to that extent. And I do also think that if you even think about the last few days, just in terms of media narratives, there's been more hours spent and more time spent about why are his numbers so historically bad, as opposed to look at all these things he's doing that make it seem inevitable. So I think in all of those ways that it does sort of matter.
I think I would add a partial comment, partial follow-up, but what you're describing is something that I think I've been saying in this room and elsewhere. What has to happen is we have to make those swing district Republicans more afraid of the voters than they are of Trump. And isn't that the way to do it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You should have been a political consultant, not me.
All right, we've got
Speak to
one
me later.
more over here. We'll probably just do a couple more. What is your name, ma'am?
Excuse me, my name is Dagmar. I don't have a card.
No, you didn't follow the rules.
No, that's exactly my point, actually. Can I take us to an even darker place? I'm from Germany. And so let's assume we take the 50,000 folks into the streets. We become super strong. We make our demands heard. Is the Insurrection Act not hanging over us? Are we prepared if he enforces it and there can just be, just a flamethrower? And then we have the situation that we had in Russia, not just in Germany, where Putin blew up apartment buildings and then blamed it on so-called terrorists and became the strongman. So if that happens here, are we then, if he enforces the Insurrection Act, are we prepared to go underground? Is that too dark?
If I can sort of summarize, if we get big enough to do all the things we're talking about here that need to be done, have we then invited the Insurrection Act?
You want to start? I think that the Insurrection Act is coming no matter what. I think it's coming for it will be introduced for the purposes of enforcing immigration law, but I think that is coming. And I think what that does is, if there are 50,000 people out in the street on Thursday, the moment that there's an Insurrection Act, there needs to be 75,000. And from there on up, because it can't be that this is normal. And I think one of the things I think we're going to see, and I hate to predict it this way, but I think to go to your I think that we're going to see the act introduced, and we're going to see militarization of the immigration enforcement process, not that it hasn't been militarized enough. And then I think there'll be an effort to sort of spread out from there. And I think it's important, and this I will, just to your 5 calls idea, there should be calls to every elected official at every level across the country that the minute he invokes the Insurrection Act, that people are out standing up, anybody who has a platform and a microphone, and screaming no.
Is part of this to find a reason to implement it before the midterm so that he can cancel elections? And can he? Not to speak to his motives, but can he do that?
You want to go with that one?
I mean, I'll try. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, can he? Well, I don't know if that's the question. Sort of, will he? Right? Will he think that it's the politically salient thing to do? The other thing, as I was listening to Ed's response, is for us to also remember that, dissent and protest has been criminalized and for a very long time in this country. And so this would not be a new thing. What might be new, what hopefully will be new, is the breadth of it and who's going to get caught up in it. I mean, we don't need to look any further to what happened on the streets of Chicago during the summer of 2020 to see what happens when powerful governments want to quash dissent. So that's already here. Those threats are already here. And not all of us are bearing the weight of those threats equally. And it's for those of us who have privilege that need to actually be willing to bear the weight of those threats.
We will do one more question to be respectful of our panelists' time. Who has a blue card? Anybody got a blue card? You have a blue card? You are the winner. Come on down.
My name is Michelle. I am a non-lawyer, and it feels like some of the judicial process is really slow. I know there's been some quick actions, but how do you recommend I learn more about that, or more patience, or do something in the meantime besides calling my representatives?
This is definitely not the time to exercise patience. It's definitely not. Definitely not. And you know, there's different tools. So the lawyers are going to keep filing their lawsuits, and then you know there are the tools of being out in the streets, of holding your local elected officials accountable, of writing in the media, putting your voice out there. I think that's you know the courts are not going to save us. There's just no way that is going to happen. It's never happened, and so it's not going to happen now. So it's not about waiting for the courts. I think it's about figuring out like what is your lane, what is your skill set, how can you best put it to use at this point.
I think that I would just agree, and I want to underscore the idea of being out wherever you can in whatever, whether it's a social media platform or a letter to the editor, as quaint as that sounds, whatever it is, I think doing all of those things and not being patient is the only way to go now. This is not the time to be silent.
Well, you're not all here because you're do-nothings. We know that's true. But if you're ready to do things specific, look at those signs we've hung up. The top QR code will help you sign up for that May 1 rally that you spoke so eloquently and clearly about how important that is, and the other actions that I discussed earlier. We've got QR codes to make it easy for you. One more thing you can do is if you want to relive these magic moments, you can watch today's show at youtube.com/Blue Beginning, Blue Beginning site on YouTube. And let your friends know if they weren't able to join us, because we had some really smart talk here tonight. Thank you again to our guests.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.